Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I am going to be talking about The Stand, Episode 1. It's simply titled The End. So, I'll start spoiler free because it is an Episode 1, and I'm reviewing this on my own because Connor's computer is broken and he will not be back recording stuff for probably a couple more weeks. But I'm going to look at this from the perspective of someone who has never read The Stand and knows very little, if anything, about what it actually is. Basically, I saw a trailer for this a couple months ago, and to be honest, I've forgotten most of the trailer. I remembered a couple of the actors that were going to be in it, but that was basically it. I knew it started with a virus, which is what this episode largely focuses on. It's the story of a couple of key characters and their journey as the virus hits and takes hold of the planet very quickly, and the fact that they're immune and kind of where they are right after kind of the world settled back down, which is about 6 or so months later in the essentially post-apocalypse world, because like 99%, give or take, of the population has died. It's been whittled right down. That's not an accurate figure per se. It's just an estimate someone makes in the episode, but it seems kind of around the right amount. So who are these characters that we follow? We follow James Marsden's character of Stu Redman, who is one of the first people who is found to be immune, and kind of his experience being tested upon and sort of kept quarantined in a science building, and his experience through that, and how he eventually ends up in the post-apocalyptic world. And we have the characters of Harold Lauder, played by Owen Teague, who is kind of this teenage, maybe college-aged young guy who honestly is probably going to be a very villainous character if any of the indications of this episode go down. There's the briefest moment where you think he might be kind of the shy teenage, guy who wants the girl, and we're going to feel sympathetic for him. That goes away extremely quickly if it was ever there at all. And then said girl that he's kind of longing after, played by Odessa Young, she's Franny Goldsmith, and we see her sort of bury her family. Again, this is not spoiler stuff. This is just basic premise stuff and basic the start of what these characters are. Uh, it turns out to be a bunch of stuff to spoil in episode ones because it is mostly just setting up the premise of the show. And as I understand it, there's a lot more to this than just they're surviving a pandemic, or they're just they're in the post-apocalypse after a giant pandemic. And there's some hints to some of that stuff. So that's basically the ones we get to know in this first episode. There's some teases of other characters, but those are the ones that we spend the most time with, and it's essentially two plot lines. There's some bookending segments that are in the sort of the quote-unquote present day of post-apocalyptic world, but most of the episode is the days leading up to, during, and right after the outbreak, and how quickly everyone dies. That is the main premise of this first episode, and how these characters go through that. So with that said, did I enjoy episode 1 of The Stand? Did I expect to enjoy episode 1 of The Stand? I honestly wasn't very sure. I wasn't very sure going into this how I was going to feel. The trailer left me feeling very kind of mixed. Like I felt like it had some production value. There were some things that seemed kind of cool, some things that felt very generic. And I'd kind of forgotten it for the most part. So sitting down to watch this episode today, going in almost completely blind, I will say that I am pleasantly surprised with most of it. Keyword there being most. There's a couple of things that I really didn't like, and I'm not sure how much of a problem they're going to be. I think the worry is that this first episode is so focused on the outbreak of the virus and the just the almost the gut wrenching, the bittersweet. Everyone's dying. We're the only few that are left. The sadness of that experience is kind of one of the strongest elements in this episode. Although, admittedly, it's one of the strongest elements thanks to the direction, which I think is mostly pretty on point. I think it's got a really solid, confident style. It's got a solid, confident look. I think the performances, for the most part, are pretty solid. There's definitely some correlations I can make, or some comparisons I can make to some other types of performances, which I'll do. Honestly, Lauder, he kind of came across to me as kind of like a Riddler in the making in places. There's one scene that's very Taxi Driver as well. I mean, I don't want to just call him an incel because I feel like that's the easy thing to say, but it kind of It's kind of what he's making me think of. Uh, so he has more over the top moments, perhaps. I don't know if Odessa Young, who I liked a lot in Assassination Nation a couple of years ago, that was a really interesting little movie. I thought she was really good in that. She doesn't get as much to do in this episode. She's kind of just this like very sad, standoffish, catatonic character who's, for the most part, very unresponsive to anything around her because she's lost her whole family and she's in the shock of all that. So she doesn't get as much to do as the other two characters in this first episode. And then James Marsden, who I do have obviously lots of opinions on because he's been in a number of things. Obviously, a lot of people know from the X-Men movies. More recently, he was a prominent character in the first 2 seasons of Westworld. And one of the jokes that we cracked a lot in Westworld is that he was kind of cast in a sort of generic, bland, like heroic male figure role because that's kind of what he feels like. And it was really good casting in that show because he was meant to be this robotic kind of generic version of this type of person, and he was very well fitted for that because of who he is. Here, of course, he's not supposed to be that, and so I was kind of wondering going into this, like, is he going to have enough character? Am I going to be saying, oh, this is just another bland kind of character that James Marsden's playing? Honestly, he's okay in this. I think him coming across as kind of normal and just kind of typical actually kind of helps the character so far, just because he is just this normal guy wrapped up in this because he happens to be immune, and he seems likable enough, if nothing, amazing, or if nothing super compelling as of yet. But he's not unlikable. And the good thing about TV shows, as much as this is a limited series and it is only the 9 episodes that we're getting, there's time to develop. There's time for these characters to grow. And I think, Lauder, for the most part, gets the most character work this episode. Redmond gets a lot of time. Stu Redmond does get a lot of time, but he gets more plot rather than character. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it does to me. Everything that he's involved in is very much about revealing the world and the process of the world and setting him up. But he doesn't get necessarily a lot of character to really act out or really give us the inner workings. And, I guess that we're dealing with this other kid who's growing more sociopathic and potentially more psychotic. He does lend himself to having a lot more screen time and a lot more showpiece moments as a performer. But that's the characters. The stuff that I didn't like, and I think the reason why it's a little bit worrying what I didn't like is because all the stuff I didn't like was the stuff that is teasing kind of maybe where the show is going and more about what the show is. Now, not so much the characters themselves. I think the characters themselves and the tease of what Lauder is going to become, I think that's fine. The tease of the villain, like the true villain of the whole thing, who is a character from other Stephen King works, and there's a few Stephen King references. I noticed some of the names in the small town that Harold and Franny are in. Like, I noticed that some of the names in the shops were very, like one was Derry something, and those references to Stephen King stuff. And I'm sure there's tons that I didn't notice because I'm not like obsessed with Stephen King work. But the teases to him is okay for the most part. The stuff that I don't love so far is all the characters have dreams at various points that almost felt out of tone with the rest of the episode because they felt so fantastical. And honestly, characters having dreams that are telling them information of where to go, it's a very overdone trope, and I'm sure there's examples that people might be able to find where I've said I've really liked it, because there probably is. There's probably examples from certain directors or certain storytellers that I think nail the atmosphere in just the right way, that I'm very intrigued by the dream or whatever. But for the most part, I think it's an overdone trope. And I think here, it kind of hurt, because everything I felt was been really well handled in terms of direction, from the introduction to the characters to their experiences at home and kind of the revelations of what they're going through. All that stuff I thought was handled fairly well. It's very consistent direction for the most of the episode. But you got to these dream sequences, and all of a sudden we're doing a kind of a different style. We're doing kind of mystical, and it feels like I've left the world of harsh reality of a virus and went into dreamland magic. And the fact that in one of them we do get a glimpse of Whoopi Goldberg's character, Mother Abigail, saying, "Hey, come find me in this place in Colorado." Like, and it's not even like ambiguous or anything. She literally just shows up and says, "Hey, come find me here. Remember that when you wake up, please." He's like, "Yeah, okay." I don't know. it was maybe my least favorite scene of the whole episode. Was that stuff. And again, we're very much just in setting up story here, so I don't think we've got into spoilers yet. I think there's some specific spoilers that I'll get to. The stuff in the present day is kind of that Harold has become part of this cleanup crew who go into houses and like clean up the dead bodies of all the people who have died and put them into like landfills and stuff like that. And that's where we start the episode, and then it flashes back to kind of what he was doing just about half a year or so ago. So that's kind of the general gist of it. You get the impression that it's kind of setting up, and the reason, one of the things I said when I saw the trailer for this, and I don't really remember what made me say it, but I remember saying after I saw the trailer that, I think I kind of get a gist of why this is called The Stand, because I never really understood what the title was about, given that all I knew from it was that it was a virus and blah, blah, blah. But the whole idea of The Stand, meaning that there's some sort of good versus evil battle happening, which isn't necessarily completely brought into this first episode, other than maybe some teases of a villainous figure of some kind. And I would assume that then Whoopi Goldberg's character, Mother Abigail, is the opposite and is trying to assemble her post-apocalyptic Avengers of sorts or something to fight the big bad. And again, I'm just making these assumptions based on what I've seen here. I don't know this. I've not read the book. I don't know any of this. I'm just making these assumptions. Lauder's character is kind of interesting. The character is called Lauder. That's Owen Teague's character. Harold Lauder is kind of interesting in that he feels like a character who there's a speech that's made towards the end because he's trying to write. It's he wants to be a writer. Stephen King loves to put characters in who are writers because he can sort of get out some of his inner demons or whatever through them. But he wants to be a writer, and there's a whole speech at the end about hate and pride and giving those things up because then we'd all be better, and how he essentially isn't. He's essentially turning to the I know I want revenge on anyone who ever made fun of me. I want to bask in this world because now I am powerful and blah 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 blah. I think that's an interesting path to take it, and if the idea that he's going to become like a foot soldier or something for the main villain, the more supernatural-esque villain, if you want to call it that, who is played by Alexander Skarsgård, who we knew was in the show. That's not like a surprise. But you don't really see him in this episode, barring, quick tease. Is there anything I want to say in spoiler free? I mean, I guess just I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think this had a bit more confidence and a bit more of a steady hand at what it was doing than I was kind of expecting. I'm just a little bit worried about when it goes into a bit more of where the show is going. But I think as a focused episode about the experiences of the Day Zero incident that led to everything, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. And there's a couple of tropey scenes. There's another sort of, I mentioned the dream stuff, but there is a really tropey scene starring J.K. Simmons, which he gives it some gravitas because he's J.K. Simmons, but otherwise it's a very... You've seen this scene before. You've seen you've had characters in other movies do this. You've had this exact kind of situation, and it felt a little bit like, yeah, okay, like okay, I've seen this, and maybe maybe when Stephen King wrote this, maybe there hadn't been a dozen movies that had this scene in it, but it just kind of made me go, okay, we're doing this, and it took me out of it a little bit. I didn't care as much. Whereas, the relationship that Stu has with the main doctor, who's played by a guy from Legion, what's his name, Hamish Linklater. He's this doctor who mainly talks to James Marsden's character, and he, kind of convinces him to help at the start. He's like, hey, look, you might have like some sort of like cure in your system. You might be able to like devise something from you. If we find out why you're immune, and convinces him to sort of, okay, right, you can do tests, you can take blood, you can do whatever. And I think their relationship throughout the episode is pretty good, and I think I was relatively compelled by the friendship. And don't get me wrong, it was fairly predictable which way it was going the entire time, but I cared enough about that I was a little, it worked well enough when it got to this destination. And then this scene with J.K. Simmons comes after, and it just kind of felt like a trope without any earning it. And it's not a knock against J.K. Simmons. He's J.K. Simmons. Uh, he's better than that. But there is a moment where James Marsden sort of like stands as if he's ready to salute. He sort of anyway. Okay, so spoilers. Let's get into spoilers so I can start being more specific about these things. Yeah, so James Marsden's story is basically that he's moved to another location. There's a sort of villainous guy who's tasked to like keep him secure, meaning that he's always swearing at him. He's telling him to put a black hood over his head to transport him, even though it's, he's an immune person who's voluntarily helping to be tested on to try and develop a cure, and he's been treated like he's like a foreign intelligence like asset or something, but they moved to another location, and then ultimately it's the entire world is falling apart. Up above, they're deep underground at this fancy CDC style location, and everyone is basically died, including the doctor is getting sick. He's coughing. He actually just wants to kill himself so he doesn't have to go through the whole thing. Because we see everyone who dies from this virus ends up with a really big puffy neck. And it's pretty disgusting actually, because there's the Cobb, I think his name is, the asshole character who it goes out of its way to make sure we don't like this asshole. But he comes in and he's like, "Oh, what's going on here then? You two." And he's clearly died. He's already got a puffy neck. But we actually get to see Marsden like stab him in the neck with a scalpel, and it's pretty disgusting. Just it's grounded enough that it doesn't feel too over the top. And I think that those reservations, whenever there's some reserve showing when it comes to those type of moments, it actually makes it feel more disgusting that they're not doing over the top slapstick, stuff spraying constantly or anything like that. It would be very easy for some of these victims to feel kind of goofy, and I think they avoid that for the most part, which is good. Again, it's just there's some reserve and some resolve showing with the direction and how much to show and how seriously to treat this. And again, solidly directed. So I think this stuff works, but he essentially, J.K. Simmons is playing the general who's in charge of the base, and he over the intercom he tells Marsden to come up to the control room, and he's got a gun, but he's standing there with a book, and he tells him how his daughter's died, and this is the book that his daughter bought him years ago, and he's going to read it. He's been reading it for the last few days, but he's essentially telling him that the world's gone to shit. And that there's no one upstairs anymore. This key card will get you out. You can go do what you want. But it's basically the scene where clearly J.K. Simmons is going to shoot himself at the end of the scene. And he asks James Marsden if there's anyone left to ask, tell them that I stood my post till the end. And it's kind of this like, sign it, this moment of respect kind of thing. And maybe it's trying to give us an insight into James Marsden's character, that Stu Redman does value this in some way, and he, as much as he is quite, he does react when Cobb is being a complete dick with his chain of command. He does respect actual good military personnel, perhaps. J.K. Simmons calls him soldier. I don't know if they mentioned earlier in the episode if he actually does have a history in the military, but it just comes off a bit cheesy and tropey. You've seen this kind of thing before, and it's especially weird that we've never met this character before this scene, and it's this weird thing where sometimes this can be quite effective, is you cast a big name in a role that's only in one scene, because you want to give it a gravitas that you're never going to get otherwise because it is only one scene. It's kind of the opposite. Sometimes it can be too distracting when like a certain character doesn't suit being like a big star, and you would rather they have like an unknown actor who's very good but unknown, so that they can just blend into the role. You don't want to be distracted by it being J.K. Simmons in another role. But here, it maybe works in that sense because it's like, no, it's J.K. Simmons. So instantly there's a gravitas, and I respect this general for who he is because it's J.K. Simmons. He almost brings something to the role because he's on a meta level that makes it kind of work in a weird way. He stands tall. But yeah, and that's kind of the last we see of Stu. I mean, I did gloss over it. He has a dream sequence. He has a dream sequence where he sees the wolf, I think it is. It's the same wolf that was seen before Whoopi Goldberg's character popped up in the other dream, which was to Franny, Franny's the one who actually gets to see Whoopi Goldberg. Whereas Harold, on the other hand, when he has his dream towards the end of the episode, this is after we've like sort of went back to the future, no pun intended. He sees like a wolf, but then like a shadowy figure kind of walks out and offers him like it's like a bean, I think, something. It's like a marbles bean style thing. I wasn't really quite sure what it was, but the idea that this sinister villain is maybe kind of recruiting him for whatever he's doing, and it leads me to speculate the entire virus, the entire thing, in some way came from this shadowy figure. Who I don't know what the figure's name is, but it's not been brought up in the show yet, so I'm not gonna mention it. But yeah, so we don't see him again until a sort of surprise appearance in the future segment, where So I'll go back and talk about Harold Lauder's sort of journey. We see that he's picked on, but he's picked on when he's kind of been a peeping Tom. So it's kind of like, maybe he's sympathetic, but he's a bit old for this to be anything other than just like pervy. But then as things go on, and you see him practicing conversations, and you see him screaming in the mirror, and you see him essentially getting dressed and orchestrating the idea that he's shouting for other survivors right near Franny's fence so she'll hear him and invite him in. It turns out that Franny used to be his babysitter. She was friends with his sister, who, like everyone else in this town, like they're literally the only two people left that are alive in this town. And she tells him to get lost because she's trying to bury her father. In fact, probably the one big scene that she has, other than maybe the dream sequence, that's just completely her own, is the scene where, as things are playing out in one of the other scenes, it keeps cutting back to her, and she's like trying to. Essentially, she's got her father in his like military uniform, and she puts a photo with him. But it's basically just this, this young woman struggling on her own to take her, old elderly father, who's clearly much bigger, and on top of what his natural weight might be, he has this big puffy ass neck, which is probably just adding to things. And she's like wrapping up in a blanket, and it's showing you her struggle to take him down the stairs. I like this on its own quite a bit, because I think it would be very easy to have a lot of scenes, and a lot of other TV shows would do this, where you'd have a bunch of characters sitting around talking about all the people they've lost and how hard it is. I think what I appreciate about this and how this episode is written, which I'll really give it some cred here for, is that the genuine moments of like characters like mourning and like the impact of losing everyone they know around them, for the most part, at least with these two characters, like it's done through action. So we see her like have to like struggle to bury her own father next to two other graves, which were her brother and her mother, presumably. And you get this, it just, you see her physically struggling, you see her sweating, and then afterwards you see her like sort of collapse, and you see her eventually, she does take a lot of pills, and this is when Harold finds her later, when he's got his plan and he's got his hair all slicked back and he's trying to impress her. I mean, he basically says to her that he wants to take her to the CDC, and that's his plan, is to go and like maybe offer their help. Which obviously, maybe we'll see more of that journey. Maybe the flashback structure is going to continue next episode. I'm not sure if it will. I'm not sure if there's too much of a story between that and the present stuff, or if it's just a case of, no, we had to tell you how everything happened, but there's maybe not too much between that and now. Maybe there's a bit of the journey. Having said that, we do find out the big sort of reveal, I suppose, is that in the present day, or the future, whatever you want to call it, the post-apocalyptic timeline, is that Stu and Franny are a couple, and she's pregnant. And Harold in this scene like sort of fakes a smile, and this is when he felt very Riddler-esque. He felt he was doing this big cheesy grin, and he's been practicing it here, because in the opening scene when he's going through the house, and there's this guy who works with him who's like grabbing Blu-rays off of like this shelf in this house that they're emptying. And he asks him why he always takes movies. And so this is the movie theater guy, because he wants to build his own drive-in when they can get electricity back, so that he can charge people and they can all sit around and watch movies, because he loves movies, and it's a commendable goal. I don't I don't unsympathize with that. But one of the things he sees a magazine with Tom Cruise, and it's you've probably all seen the photo of Tom Cruise. He's sort of smelling and pointing, and later there's a scene. Before he runs into them, I think it is, there's a scene where he's just in the bathroom at the mirror, and he's just sort of like pointing and smelling, and it doesn't reveal it right away, but when he moves a bit, you can then see the camera sort of just pivots a little, and you can see he's got the magazine photo, the cover like taped to the mirror in the corner, and he's trying to do the Tom Cruise pose. He's trying to fake this nice, friendly man that he wants people in. It does come across as really creepy when he's smiling at them and he's saying, "That'd be great. Yeah, I'll come over for dinner." He does come across as very unhinged. Almost to the point where I don't really buy that these characters don't see that he's completely unhinged. That's maybe the only fault with it, is that I'm like, well, he's clearly not to be trusted. I wouldn't trust him near anyone that I care about or don't want to be met with a violent end. He looks very unstable the entire time. And he's got the hair slicked back a lot. He has that very Riddler-esque kind of thing. A little bit, like I said, the mirror scene definitely gave me some Taxi Driver vibes with him. And then after that, he gives his monologue as he's typing away about going into about not giving up hate and pride, and no, to give up that would be give up me and forgetting all the injustices and all the humiliation I felt and yada yada yada. So, and it was, I mean, I guess thematically I like that brings in the ideas of why he's kind of a villain, because he's given into all the worst parts of humanity. And maybe that'll neatly slide into the rest of things. But there is and the idea that he's obviously like seething. He's seething that he was bonding with this woman, Franny, who, after he saves her and tells her a plan, she does rest her head on his shoulder, and it's like his eyes light up. It's like his plan's working, and it feels creepy the whole time. It never feels genuine. It always feels like, no, he's rehearsed these things too much. He's coming across as a complete sociopath. It's just the way he's approached everything, despite the fact that from her perspective, maybe he's got a point, and maybe this isn't so bad, and maybe this is the way we should do things. Because they do leave together. They leave on a couple of bikes for Atlanta. But from our perspective, because we've seen kind of his side of things, or the creepy scene where he finds the crashed police car after everyone's died, and he steals the gun from the cop, and there's just a scene of him like holding the gun out, and it's like he's feeling power for the first time, and I think that's maybe the most interesting thing about the show so far for me, is the idea that this character, who I would argue was already dangerous, the more he had time to like become more, if he had more time to develop and become more dangerous and go down this dark side of his humanity, he would be dangerous in a more real world way anyway eventually. But the idea that he is going to benefit and essentially use this post-apocalypse to essentially bolster his feeling of strength, the idea that he now feels like he's an important person, that he feels powerful, and that the scene where he holds up the gun and seems to really like the idea of holding that power in his hand, kind of again leads to this idea of, and in this post-world where so many people have died and there's so few that are left, he feels important. He feels like he finally has the strength to take what he wants. And I think, part of him seething that, this woman that he's, obsessed with is now with someone else, with generic man that is James Marsden. And I mean that, he's a nice enough dude, seemingly. I don't mean anything bad by that. But he's seething. So I think that character deconstruction and the analysis of that character, I think, is the thing I'm most excited about, and the potential of covering more of this. I am going to come back and check out episode 2. I'm not necessarily promising I'm doing the whole thing. I'll see how I feel after a couple, given that I have some reservations about the magic dreams and the that stuff, because I'm not sold on that. But I think the idea that he is going to basically benefit from the new situation that is it's opening this door for people like him, the worst parts of humanity, to take advantage, and essentially because he saves one of the movie guy almost falls in the pit of people of the bodies, and he sort of grabs him, so he kind of makes a friend just by kind of saving his life. So, and I see that going badly for the movie guy, to be honest. He's kind of separate from everyone else. That I can see, if we're going to get a story where this guy ends up killing, when Lauder starts killing people, because it feels like it might go that way, the movie guy is separate enough that he might be the first one to show the audience that he's hit that point when not everyone else knows they're in danger yet or something. I don't know. But yeah, so we'll see how it goes. But anyway, there's another little section at the end. There's very standalone. There's a soldier who's kind of working the security at another lab. I think it's a different lab. I don't think it's the same lab that Redmond came out of, but basically, the scientist comes out in a hazmat suit, but she's infected, her throat's all going, and the soldier hits the button to lock everything down, runs out, and he just runs home to his wife and child, and says, "No, we need to pack, we need to go." And it's just a rush sequence of them getting to his car so that they can leave. But as they're fleeing, he has this vision of the mysterious man, this shadowy figure at the side of the road. He disappears, but then when he looks in the rearview mirror, he's sitting in the back seat with his kid, and that's where the episode ends. It's so like separate from everything else, and I'm not so sure I like the final couple scenes. That they're all right in what they're doing. It feels like there should have been a scene with this. Maybe there wasn't. I'm forgetting about it, but it felt like this character, the soldier, should have been introduced more prominently at the very start of the episode or near the start of the episode. The idea that we'd bookend with this, and it would feel like we're coming back to someone and go, "Oh, finally, this guy again. What was he doing?" It felt like we just cut to someone new, and it felt so random that okay, why are we focusing on this character being pursued by the villain as opposed to anyone else? And given that the villain was presented completely in shadow in the dream sequence for Harold Lauder, it feels weird to me not to have a similar visual of him to introduce him in this scene to make it very clear it's the same person. I think it is based on a couple of things. I think you see like a little bit of his beard in the first time, but it felt like it was like I was really having to stretch for that. I feel like maybe more of a direct link to again link it back to a previous scene to make this last little section not feel as completely tacked on as it was. But it's it's a minor complaint ultimately because I'm curious. I'm curious about this character. I'm curious to see what he's up to and all that stuff. But so I think this episode's fairly well made. I would say I had a decent time watching it. I think it's pretty much a full hour long, which sometimes I can feel it grates a little bit. I'm not so sure it couldn't have maybe done with maybe 5 or 10 minutes cut, but I wouldn't say it overstays its welcome either. I think the three leads all fulfill their roles well enough. I have a couple of concerns over the more magical things that are in the episode. I'm not a big fan of the dream sequences for the most part. And if that becomes an even bigger thing, if we get episodes and episodes of them having dream sequences before they finally meet Whoopi Goldberg, I might get a little frustrated with that. So we'll see. But I do think there's some really solid elements to this episode. I think the direction is mostly pretty solid. So not bad. Not bad. I'll check out episode 2, see how I'm feeling then. But not a bad start by any means. And there's not a lot of TV on right now, so it feels good to actually be reviewing a new show that's of interest. So, and if you're looking for The Expanse Season 5, we're just waiting until Connor can record. He's been there for every episode of that show. It'd feel really weird for half of Season 5 to just be me, because 3 episodes went up week 1, and it'll be 1 per week. So by the time he's back, there's probably going to be like 5 episodes done. It would be weird. So we're just starting it once he's back. But we weren't waiting to start a new show. I'll just do this on my own. So, but yeah, so hopefully you had some fun with my thoughts. Maybe you'll stick around, check out other reviews we've done. You can, of course, support everything we do by hitting the like button. It's the easy and free way of doing so, and it does help a lot. It helps a lot because YouTube will promote us more and will spread us out to more people. The more likes and comments and all that sort of good stuff. But you can support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble. Mostly just a warm, fuzzy feeling for helping keep all the content coming and showing your support and being part of the MailFuzzTV community. You can, of course, catch us on Twitter at mail_fuzz for channel updates. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys. Have you got any vanilla?